For over half a century, humans have endeavored to make business a force for good. But is the movement working? Or is it time to explore a new path forward? Welcome to Less Talk, More Action. We are your hosts, Joel Caesar and Owen Barrett, experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. In each episode, we ask provocative questions and share stories from the front lines of sustainability with leaders in science, tech, and business taking real action to design a cleaner, better future. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to Less Talk, More Action podcast. My name is Joel Caesar, the world's undisputed voice, building decarbonization. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of Green Building. Today's guest, Auden Schendler, a nationally recognized climate leader and longtime sustainability executive, the author of Terrible Beauty, Reckoning with Climate Complicity and Rediscovering Our Soul. So, cool to have an author, really passionate, smart guy. You gotta love these dudes that just like have amazing, inspiring quotes just at the ready. I always wanted to be one of those people, but I'm not. But yeah, I think we bounced around a lot with him, but man, I was like super engaged the whole time.
Yeah, great conversation. Man, his saying, he said at one point, it's like being in an ass-kicking contest with one leg.
He basically described you and me, our careers as that. Yeah.
No, that's a good one. I mean, it's like some people are not going to want to hear what he has to say, but it's important to listen.
Yeah, well said. Well, before we get into all that with Auden, let's dive into a segment very appropriate for his show, the Let's Talk More Action Book Club. So I asked you to think about what is your favorite sustainability, environmentalist related book. So what do you got?
Well, it's not specific to the sustainability movement, but it's actually written by the guy that started Tom's, Blake Mycoskie. He wrote a book called Start Something That Matters.
Something That Matters. I love that book. Yeah.
And it's just, it's a simple, easy read, but it's just like so many people are starting companies, or you could even look at it from like an entrepreneur perspective, but it's just instill a little impact in everything that you do. Like if everybody just did that, we'd be in a better spot. So I think it's important to think about that as you're going through your day, your daily grind, just like have an impact where you can. It could be environmental, it could be something else, but just kind of going out throughout your day like that.
Yeah, it's a good one. I would call that a business book too. I think two of my favorite business books are that and Yvon Chouinard's Let My People Go Surfing, right?
Yeah, it's a classic.
Well, I'm going to say mine is kind of wonky and nerdy, but it's called Hot, Flat, and Crowded. Have you heard of this book?
Yeah, who wrote it?
I think I've read it. Thomas Friedman. He's a famous New York Times columnist. Yeah. He initially wrote a book called The World is Flat, I think, and that was a pretty famous book about globalization. And then years later, he kind of followed it up with this Hot, Flat, and Crowded, and it was more about how the world was burning, and climate change and environmental issues were going to become the dominant force of the next century. And he was like way ahead of his time. That book was probably, 10, 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was talking all about how we'd have smart devices and everything would be demand response and our washing machine would only turn on when the grid was at a certain perspective. And it's like, I remember reading that like 15 years ago. I'm like, man, that seems like a long way away. And weirdly, we have the tech to do that now, but it's still not happening. I don't have a washing machine that communicates to the grid.
But I've been starting to see like stoves with integrated batteries.
Yeah, that's
I think we're getting there. I still think we're like 15 years out from mass adoption, but we're starting to see it.
Where it's like my whole house is so smart. It's like the dishwasher only runs when the grid dollar per kilowatt hits a certain point. I don't have to set anything. It just does that.
Dude, the problem with all of this, because I just went through building a house, fucking contractors don't know how to install it. It doesn't matter how good the devices are. If you can't have a contractor that understands how to build an all-electric house, or you need to build an all-electric house, or how to like pre-run conduits so that you have the right like size circuits where the right devices need to go, it doesn't matter if you have the devices. You need the people building the things to know how to install them, which is sort of like that's a pattern we see a lot in this space.
You figured out how to do all this with solar on multifamily. Why don't you just expand into building the whole home?
Yeah, that's on our 2026 roadmap.
I look forward to it. Well, that was fun. Please join the Let's Talk More Action Book Club. Now let's dive into our conversation with Auden Schendler. Joining us today is Auden Schendler, a nationally recognized climate leader and longtime sustainability executive. For more than 2 decades, Auden ran sustainability programs at Aspen One, the company behind Aspen ski resorts, hotels, restaurants, and retail shops. His work has focused on large-scale solutions to climate change, from clean energy development and public policy to advocacy and movement building. Auden is the author of Getting Green Done and the new book, Terrible Beauty, Reckoning with Climate Complicity and Rediscovering Our Soul. He has been named a climate innovator by Time Magazine and a climate saver by the EPA. With his unique blend of practical experience, activism, and storytelling, Auden has become a leading voice in mobilizing business, policy, and the outdoor industry to confront the climate crisis. So, Auden, welcome to Let's Talk, More Action.
Hey, great, and I love the title of your show.
Thank you, sir. Well, on that note, we like to get right to work. So our first question, Auden, how are you taking action to make the world a better place?
Yeah, I mean, my career has been essentially to ask the question, what if you really cared about climate change, whether you were a government or a corporation or an individual? What would the things that you do, what things would actually drive change at a meaningful level versus the sorts of smaller token activities that really pass for environmentalism today? And so my career was coming up with ideas and then trying to implement them and then sometimes implementing them. And I now write about that as well to try to spread the word on what I see as a failure of modern environmentalism, but an incredible opportunity to do a lot more.
Man, I love that perspective. We don't hear that a lot.
The failure of modern environmentalism.
Yeah,
You
I
don't.
mean, give us.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, give us a little taste, a high level of if we were to actually take this problem seriously, what should we be doing?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples from my book. Typically, an environmentalist in the United States says, I'm going to make my house more energy efficient and I'm going to use efficient light bulbs. But that action is totally admirable and it saves money and energy, but it doesn't solve a global systemic problem. If you ask that same question and said, I care about climate change and my electricity use, you could come to much more high leverage answers. So one answer would be, where does my power come from? How would I change that utility to ensure that the power were 100% renewable? That would mean my power was green, but so would be everyone in the region. And that was a project that we undertook at Aspen Skiing Company when I was there. We basically staged a coup on the rural electric co-op utility, and over a decade took over the board. So the power that was running our ski resort went from 6% renewable to last month they hit 96% renewable. Well, we changed the whole region. They have 60,000 customers today. That's a systemic solution that can be replicated versus me just changing light bulbs and buying an efficient refrigerator.
So Joel doesn't like when I get political on this podcast, but I feel like that's a Republican approach to solving climate change. Like getting in the weeds and doing like more aggressive tactics to similar where they're taking over, districts and courts and inserting people here and there. You guys did the same thing, but on the board of the utility. I mean, it's evil genius. Not evil, it's just genius.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, which is to say, okay, Auden, do we really want corporations intervening in utility politics? And my response would be, no, we don't want them on the good side, which is pro-climate, or on the bad side, which is anti-climate. But that's the way the world works right now.
Yeah.
And until you say, no, there is no money in politics, corporations can't wield influence in this way, why should only the bad guys get to play? And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of, it's hardball for sure.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, let's talk more hardball here. Auden, the book, Terrible Beauty. So this is what caught my attention and why we invited you on the show. Well, there's probably lots of reasons we should have, but I saw this book, and I correct me if I'm wrong, I think a core thesis of it is, hey, what we're doing isn't working. The sustainability movement, environmentalism, it's not achieving the objectives we set out. And I say this all the time. I joke with Owen that I want to write my own book on a similar topic. I think it's important, and I'll admit, look, I haven't written my book, and there's lots of reasons I'm not a brilliant author like you, but it's like, as I kind of rail in my professional circles or on this podcast or on social media about this idea, like, hey, this isn't working, people go to me, all right, well, great. What's your solution, Joel? And I'm like, I don't know, except that I feel proud that at least I think I'm right in recognizing that what we're currently doing isn't working. I think that's the first step. So I guess, would you agree? And maybe tell us more about what motivated you to write the book.
Well, all you have to do to understand whether things are working or not is to look at emissions of CO2 and global temperature, which is sort of the indicator of sustainability. It's going up, it's going up, it's going up. So we're failing. The environmental movement has failed. Let me just give you just a tight history of how I got to this point. I started in sustainable business, and I was young, in my early 20s. I was incredibly optimistic because the field was so exciting. You know, it was the stuff of TED Talks. If you change your light bulbs, if you build green buildings, if you put solar on the roof and reduce energy use, you save money and it's good for the environment. Therefore, business will be a key agent in solving climate change. So I started doing it. I did all the stuff. In fact, most of my career was implementation. Light bulbs, LEED buildings, other green buildings, HVAC retrofits, you name it, renewable energy. And every time I did that stuff, I said, is this enough given the scale of the climate crisis? The answer was always no. So my initial conclusion was, this isn't enough. So we're going to do more. And then I asked the question again, is it enough? And I thought, man, we're being distracted from bigger scale action. And those actions might be policy, they might be movement building, they might be using corporate voice. Over time, though, I realized corporations are actually using this kind of operational greening where they look after their own stuff but nothing else as a dodge. And the dodge is to avoid the difficult political action. So if you think Tim Cook at Apple, if he made a big public statement on climate 10 years ago, he would have been crucified. And so it was a way to look environmental without taking action. And then the final stage of my kind of jadedness and dismal take was that actually this is complicity with a fossil fuel status quo. Because if you ask the fossil fuel industry, what would you want these really powerful entities, corporations, to do to look like they were green, but never get in the way of your systemic fossil fuel economy? The answer would be, write sustainability reports, buy carbon offsets, do operational greening. It was everything I was doing. So that's how I got to, that's what the complicity in terrible beauty means.
Owen does clean energy. I work with software that provides insights to do HVAC and energy efficiency retrofits. So we're both doing nothing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, the goal here was a personal takedown of you guys. No.
And instead of writing a book, we have a podcast. So I guess that we're doing something.
Because you guys are in this field, you understand very well that what you need is a functional market, right? Where right now you're trying to do this really important work in a market system that allows people to pollute for free. No one on the right would say that's capitalism, right? In capitalism, you don't get something for free. Everything has a value or a cost. And so I'm saying you guys are doing God's work, but you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. You've got an inability to do the work because of policy. Now, the policy also incentivizes fossil fuels. If you've dug in on this, there are massive subsidies for fossil fuels. And what we do, we just took away subsidies for this emerging industry of solar and wind and other renewables like geothermal. So all I'm saying is let's have market rules that enable you two to do your job at scale instead of just doing it with people or in markets where it works.
So I've always been solution oriented, and I agree with everything you're saying. But how do we fix it? I mean, this is as you've said a couple times here, this is a massive systemic problem, not only from the fossil fuel industry, but also politically. I mean, how can we fix it? Or what should we be doing instead of trying to deploy clean tech that is apparently not worth our time?
That's what I was going to ask. Like, we both think we're doing something. What should we be doing?
Right. You're doing something, but you're hindered by the lack of appropriate policy in the United States. Appropriate policy, an example, was the Inflation Reduction Act, which helped you guys do the work you're doing. But now that's gotten gutted. So my thesis is...
Should I run for Congress in Pennsylvania, my home state?
Oh, yes.
On previous episode, I was talking about governor, so now I guess I'm going to do Congress.
Okay, yeah. Governor would be better because you're not.
Let's start small, Joel. Maybe do city council first.
Right. Okay, so what I'm saying is, how would we get to a world where, for example, pollution cost money, carbon pollution, instead of it being free? How would we get to policies like the Inflation Reduction Act, but that were also regulatory? Inflation Reduction Act was incentive-based. How do you get broad systemic change and a movement of people to power government forward with those good policies? And here's an example of how I'm thinking about that from the corporate sector. Instead of a powerful, famous corporation like Apple, for example, doing all this incredible operational greening to reduce its carbon footprint, if you just got Tim Cook to say, you know what, federal government, we need climate action. It's hurting our business, our employees, and our mission as a company includes dealing with the climate crisis, which is true with Apple. And if he did that as a business leader, let's say he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, it would be a game changer because they're the most important company in the world. They're incredibly well respected, and he would pave the way for other business. So if that happens, other businesses might follow and government might listen. Now, you can't hope that Apple's going to do that, so you need a movement of people that will push these companies. Where does that pressure come from? Well, pivoting a little bit to my work, think about that, the NRA. The NRA is an example of a group with 5 million people. They won their issue in Washington, 5 million people.
Yeah,
think about the outdoor industry. Depending on how you measure it, it could be as much as 100 million people or more. But those people aren't politically active. What if you mobilize them to push on Apple? What if you mobilize them to push on government more directly?
Well, they're not as aligned as the NRA, right? Like the NRA is laser focused, like, and they're all aligned. Those 5 million people, they don't budge an inch. And I guess that's probably the challenge, right? Is the outdoor and people, they're still like debate. Oh, I think composting is more important than climate, or I think the ocean's more important than recycling. So it's hard to get them aligned like the NRA, I guess, right?
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying with the Apple example and with, say, the outdoor industry mobilization example is, where are the big scale efforts that could drive policy or create movements that would get to ultimately what we need is a revolution, so that we could have a society that costs out pollution, regulates carbon dioxide, incentivizes it, and we can do these things that make sense. And we're slipping backwards on that.
Well,
I think it's an interest. Oh, go for it, Joel.
Well, I might push back and agree at the same time here, Auden, with this. And I love your perspective on this idea. I think we're dancing around something Owen and I have chatted about before on this show, which is like movement. I agree. I was inspired to be an environmentalist when I was in college, and maybe that was born when I was younger and I was exposed to nature, and I decided to make this my career. And at some point, I became a carbon emission bean counter for a big corporation, and I'm like losing whatever innate motivation I had to save the planet, because I'm like, what am I doing? This doesn't feel like I'm an environmentalist. And so I guess it's a way of saying I'm agreeing with you. We need a movement, and we're pointing a lot of people in a direction that is like uninspiring. But I worry that climate is part of the problem in that movement, and that it's like, this invisible gas in the atmosphere, and we're counting it with big carbon accounting wonky terminology. And it's like, this is how you dissipate a movement as opposed to like galvanizing one.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying could be applied to the environmental movement since the 70s, right? When people say, save the whales, that's making fun of the environmental movement, because you have to have enough wealth, enough security. You have to have a job. You can't be in debt to care about whales. And so the environmental movement and the climate movement has always been small. It's been abutted against, or overwhelmed by people who are just trying to pay their rent or get their kids through college or deal with healthcare costs or issues. So you're right. And I think my thesis in my book is that climate offers people this shot at a meaningful life that we haven't had historically. But since my book and since Trump's election, there's a whole nother way to play this, which is to say, we don't have to focus on climate change. We need to focus on a functional democracy. We need a democracy where in states where the majority is in favor of climate action, you elect those people. Ohio's so gerrymandered that that's not the case, even though most people in Ohio care about climate change. So I think the fight now is about democracy. If every American voted, we'd be solving climate change, because the majority on the left and right care about climate change. So pick your fight. The fights are getting more and more meta. It's money in politics, it's democracy, it's preventing the kinds of fascistic things that are happening in the US government right now. And you can also work on climate, but it's got to be a coalition. And the coalition looks like climate environmentalism, justice, equity to some extent, but also things like housing. We can make common cause with people who need housing, because most new housing is dense, near mass transit, and efficient. That's a climate solution.
Yeah. I think your analogy to the NRA and only having 5 million people basically control DC is so interesting. I feel like part of the problem with climate change and sustainability is that a big part of our team, I'll call it, likes to sit back and complain and do nothing else. So how do we change that? How do we get people out of this complaining mentality and more into a taking action mentality? Because I agree, if we all came out of the woodwork and voted on issues they think are important, we probably would have had a different result in last election and every election moving forward.
And not just vote, get involved.
It doesn't seem like our side likes to do anything besides talk and complain. It's like we need to change that somehow.
Or go on climate marches, which don't seem to be doing anything.
Yeah, more people go on climate marches than they vote, which is
right.
Idiotic.
Well, I think part of the problem, which I'm identifying in my book, is that people said, I care about climate, I care about the environment. What should I do? And the answer was, recycle this plastic soda bottle. And then the person says, that can't possibly be a solution.
It's one of Owen's favorite issues, yeah.
It's not a solution. Plastic doesn't get recycled. So people know this. They know that these things don't scale. But when Americans have been offered a cause that was moral and important, they showed up. So I'll give you a couple examples. The civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam protests, whatever you think about Vietnam, helped end the war. And these were moral causes that people cared about. So one, you have to couch it. For years, we couched the climate fixes, national security, saving money and energy. That's not what Americans care about. Fundamentally, movements are built on moral issues. So you need that. And then you need something you can do that is actually making a difference. So my example of the finding out how your utility makes decisions and then figuring out how to change that's an example. Climate marches or democracy marches are important, actually, because people are showing up and signaling to government that there's a movement there. But then there are other actions that are more real than signing on to the thing that 10,000 other people have signed on and that Congress people don't look at. You have to go to Washington. And so one of the things I say is that if it's quick and easy, which a lot of these environmental fixes are, it's not doing anything. The test of whether you're being successful is, was it difficult? Did it make you nervous? Did it cause you to stay up all night? Did someone get mad at you? Did you have to travel? Those things. And so let me give you another example from the book. My company boycotted Kleenex because of a position Kleenex was taking. which
This
was, they
was
were logging endangered forests.
This was Aspen.
Aspen did this, and Kleenex is owned by Kimberly-Clark, which is a giant multinational.
Yeah.
So Aspen's nothing, right? It's this rinky-dink company. It is bigger now, but at the time it was really a small ski resort. And we did the boycott, and we got in all kinds of trouble for it. You can imagine the kinds of trouble. Oh, you're Aspen. You fly people from Europe and then move them up and down on a hill using coal power, and you're criticizing those guys? We got killed in the local papers. But 10 days into this, we got a call from a senior vice president, Kimberly-Clark, saying, our CEO wants to talk to your CEO. And I was like, I took the call. Really? We have almost no revenue and you have $20 billion in revenue. And they said, yeah, but Aspen's the most famous ski resort in the world. We don't want you boycotting Kleenex. Okay. 3 years later, 700 companies joined this boycott that was run by Greenpeace. We have an ongoing conversation with the CEO and our CEO. And we say, look, you gotta talk to the environmental groups. You can not log endangered forests and you can use post-consumer waste. Kimberly-Clark radically changed how it did forestry. And we ended our boycott. And this is, the military calls this asymmetric warfare. Small entities winning against a much more powerful entity. But it was uncomfortable. It took forever. It was awkward. I got in a lot of trouble. Our CEO was kind of put in a difficult situation. That's a climate solution.
I like it. I think a lot of companies are scared to take hard stances now because they've seen backlash in wokeness, which I would say is close to the sustainability movement. So I think it's a hard political environment.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a hard political environment for like Apple to come out and say, we're going to do this in support of climate change because half of the idiots in America are going to stop buying iPhones.
Or they'd get tariffed the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man.
But I mean, so Auden, I want to get back to the book, but I'm fascinated by the asymmetrical warfare analogy and a couple of examples you've given here, right? Like, I guess you're doing this. So you're wearing a few hats. You're an author. You teach. You do also consult, advise. So major corporation. Let's not keep using Apple. I don't know. Someone else comes to you and says, Auden, read the book. Tell me what to do. Is asymmetric warfare what you lead with?
Well, this happened. A corporation came to me and said, hey, here's what we're doing. We're going to certify to a carbon neutral third-party standard, and we're going to buy carbon offsets.
It's Owen's favorite thing.
What do you think of that? And I said, well, let's look at the rest of your industry. There are hundreds of people who've certified to a carbon neutral standard. So that does nothing for you. It does nothing for the planet. It gives you no brand differentiation. You're just basically doing the minimum required to be somewhat green. They said, okay, we understand that. And then I said, most carbon offsets don't do anything. They're very cheap, and they've gotten cheaper because they don't work.
It's the epitome of if it's cheap and easy, it's not doing anything.
Right. Price is an indicator of value.
Yeah.
And so this doesn't make sense. What you should do is not follow the pack and do something that shows you're a true leader. You should use your public voice to drive change at a policy or a movement level. You should write op-eds. Your CEO should speak out. You should support NGOs that are doing this. And I got out of the meeting, and the CEO said, we heard you. We understand what you're saying. And we're going to do the carbon certification and offset thing. And I was like, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah.
No, so it's a topic that comes up on the podcast all the time. It's the easy way out. It's a cop out. Nobody really digs into the details of carbon offsets and RECs and what are they actually doing, and it's an unfortunate reality that we're kind of living in.
Yeah, right. I mean, and Auden, maybe this is a good point. Like you and I were chatting right before the show, and I love what you said about. I think this is right before the show. You said like false optimism is worse than like pessimism. All right, am I paraphrasing? You say it better.
Well, we were talking about, one of the things that I am, and it sounds like you guys are, is realistic, and realistically on climate, we are now headed towards 3.3 degrees warming by end of century. That's where we're headed. So to not talk about that and be like, we can do it. EVs are growing and they are growing, but the reality is we're headed in the wrong direction. That doesn't help anyone. We need to understand the problem and act at scale and accordingly. So this kind of false optimism, I think, is more dangerous than kind of a realism that looks like pessimism, because you have to understand the beast you're fighting.
Yeah, and the reason I thought about that was like I was gonna make a joke about who's winning from a business standpoint in the climate movement, and I think you would have argued earlier, like, the fossil fuel industry sitting back there laughing at the craziness that we all do to just spin ourselves in circles. But it's like the third party that you pay to certify yourself carbon neutral, they're doing great. Like financially, are they making a difference? I don't know, but it's like we're spending all this money and so much resources going to these entities that, and maybe this is a good segue to ask you a question. I think it was in our notes for you. We've talked about some of this so far, but like, what happened to the environmental movement? I mean, I get in your book, like, how did we get here?
Yeah, this is actually a kind of a historical question that I got to a little bit in the book, but afterwards understood much better. So think about the 1960s, this time of great turmoil in the United States. We had rampant pollution. I grew up in New Jersey in the 70s and 80s. It was an absolute dump. You couldn't see LA, you couldn't see New York. You had major injustice in the streets. You had all these social issues. So what happened? Major revolution in American politics. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Clean Air Act, the Wilderness Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, the creation of the EPA, right? All that happened. And what do you think the business community thought when that happened? They were like, what's going on? The Clean Air Act was real regulation. Like, this was draconian. It cleaned up our cities, right? You can now see New York City from the New Jersey side. The Clean Water Act cleaned up our rivers. It worked. And Americans love them if you do polling on that. But business said, never again. And I don't know if you know this history, but in 1971, a lawyer named Lewis Powell, who later became a Supreme Court justice, he wrote a memorandum called the Powell Memorandum. And it said, we can't let this happen. We can't let government just dominate us with regulation. And in 1972, the Business Roundtable was created to block all legislation that would be regulatory on environment, basically to block all regulation. And they did it. If you think about environmental history, nothing major like the Clean Air Act was passed again. The Montreal Protocol was an international agreement that had a corporate solution to it, so I don't count that. So they won. Who's a member of the Business Roundtable? Who's the chair? It's Tim Cook at Apple, right? So what gets me is part of what you haven't asked is, Auden, why should we expect corporations to be a part of the solution? And I say, then they shouldn't say they care about climate change to a customer base that will listen to them, right? Apple says, if you go on their website, it's an issue that's of great concern. So if that's the case, what are you doing being on the Business Roundtable that has blocked all climate legislation in history? These guys are also members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which has blocked civil rights and women's rights and every climate law ever. So what happened to the environmental movement that I grew up in was that business said legislation and regulation is off the table. By the way, we can solve it all because it's profitable, and all we have to do is change light bulbs and build green buildings and put solar on our roof. And no one ever questioned, including the environmental movement, which aided and abetted this theory. No one ever said, that's not enough. You can't achieve scale change without big policy. That's what happened.
Well, I will say we were close to getting Tim Cook and Apple as a sponsor, but I think you put a nail in that process.
Well, you don't have to broadcast this show.
No, I mean, a part of the solution that it seems like you're hinting at, maybe you're not, but it also seems like individuals and consumers have the ability to sort of enact change if they're to come together. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I mean, I think people will say, well, individuals have a role. And I would say, yes, but it's not recycling cans
Yeah.
and greening your house and driving your electric car. It's being part of a movement, a revolution. And your role as an individual is to be part of a civil movement.
I agree. We've talked on this podcast about how, well, at least me personally, I think the sustainability movement needs a little bit of marketing help. But I think after hearing you speak, it needs some organizational help too. Seems like there's a whole lot of people interested in, the same outcome, but we can't get organized well enough
Well, even
to be impactful.
well, I mean, it's such a good idea, Owen. It made me think of something I've been wanting to bring on the show, which is like, if we keep having guests come on here, and it feels like there's like an undercurrent movement of people recognizing the same thing the three of us are here. Like, something's not working. None of this is working. There seems to be a popular perspective. Like, where do you bring the revolution in the environmental? Like, is it Davos? Like, is it Al Gore? Like, who do you go to and be like, hey, like, we want to like break down the door here. What you guys are doing isn't working. Like, but who is the czars of the environmental movement right now? I don't know. I don't know if we have those people.
Well, it's helpful to understand movements. And, everyone thinks Rosa Parks sat down in the front of the bus and the civil rights movement started. Rosa was like the third person to sit down in the front of the bus, right? And so many people have said, actually probably more than the third, but many people have said what we're saying, what I'm saying, and it takes a while to crack through. And so you have to keep working on this. I will say the climate movement has not had great inspiring leadership.
Yes.
And that's been a void that's been marked. Al Gore is great, but he had his issues. And so you don't see a Martin Luther King or a Nelson Mandela of the climate movement. I think that's an issue. I think the fact that the status quo in environmentalism was so valuable, so valued by business and individuals that if you did anything different, people were like, why are you doing that? In my job, people would regularly say, why don't you do what Apple and Google and Procter and Gamble are doing? Do you, Auden, some guy at a little ski resort, know more than these big corporations that have all these resources? And so you should just do the conventional stuff. And I was saying the conventional stuff isn't getting us anywhere. And if you need information to prove that, just look at climate change. Look at American politics.
As someone who worked at one of those big companies in the sustainability department, I can assure you that, yes, you do know more than they do.
Good. You're the first guy.
Auden, but do you also think that you had the ability to be a little bit bold at Aspen because Aspen's business model could be so affected by climate change, whereas a lot of other industries, they can deal with it a little bit better?
I thought you were going to say the Aspen's sort of this like skier, snowboarder, countercultural, rebellious kind of place too. Like they almost like encourage that kind of fight system.
The actual reason is that we are privately held by a family that let me run and by management that let me run. And so we were able to do these things. You're right. The industry matters, but like the insurance industry hasn't done that much, and they're incredible. Like they're getting beat down by climate change.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think now that the argument should be the reality, which is that, are you telling me you don't think that Microsoft or Google or whoever is threatened by climate change? When you have, look at Charleston underwater, look at the kinds of fires that we're dealing with now in Colorado, but California or wherever. This is a threat to supply chains. It's a threat to business. It's a threat to employees. It's a threat to housing. So I think what you guys, the point you're making is, why would a corporation take a position? I'm saying it's naive to think that. And my colleague, Adam Rome, who's a professor at the University of SUNY Buffalo, he said, you're naive. And what I'm saying is, no, we need to pressure powerful entities, business, government, and influential people, billionaires, use them as levers to drive this change. And that's the approach we need to deploy to get to these more systemic solutions. Think about this just briefly. If you're a business, let's look at Coke and Pepsi. They both suck on climate. They both oppose bottle bills, even though they say they care about recycling. Like, these are not good companies. But if you knew that 72% of Americans cared about climate change, why wouldn't one of those companies say, we're going to lead on this, we're going to take a public position, we're going to do some meaningful stuff? Do you really think they're going to get crucified anymore? They might just own that. And a good example of that was when Costco said about DEI, they said, no, we kind of like seeing different faces and colors in our warehouse. And we learn from those people. We're gonna keep doing that. Look what happened to them. They're doing great. And look what's happening to Target, which has a boycott and their revenue's going down every month. So I dispute that you're gonna get attacked if you take a strong position on climate.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I hope we can see how it plays out if some corporation does take a strong stance. Because they all put it on their websites. But to your point, it's very superficial. They say one thing and they do another.
Yeah, and I think we're not waiting because it's not forthcoming. But we as a movement, as customers, as individuals, we can pressure elected officials. We can pressure corporations. One of the things that happened with the Inflation Reduction Act was when it was up for a vote, it was one of the first times when there was a negative consequence to taking an anti-climate position. Joe Manchin, in the past, you could be a climate denier. You could deny the science. You could vote no on these bills, and it was no problem. No one would criticize you. Manchin got hammered. He got hammered by Bill Gates, by the ski industry, by other businesses in West Virginia saying, you got to do this. That's new, and that's a movement. Bill McKibben says that the zeitgeist changed on climate. And so there's this opportunity, but again, it's this difficult stuff that's movement building that's not as easy as driving your EV.
Yeah. Well, Auden, this has been fascinating. I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. Maybe this question it's our typical last question. I'm gonna restructure it a little bit because there's a piece you and I chatted before the show that we wanted to get to, which was, so it's related. We're going to ask you, like, hey, the environmental movement has had downsides before, and there's a lot of negative news cycles, but we like to focus on optimism and solutions here. So what gives you hope for the future? So that's the question. But on top of that, tell me, like you and I were talking about this before the show, like I worry sometimes, like I'm too jaded. I've been doing this for 20 years. I saw this early environmental movement, like you were saying earlier, like that everything was going to happen and young people were going to follow along and we were going to do the thing. And like, I've seen some backsliding, of course, and I don't know where we are now. So I guess one, what gives you hope for the future? Answer that like we would all our shows, and then like tell all the people out there like me why to keep fighting.
Okay, so your first one, I just read an article. I was an early adopter of an electric vehicle because I got given one through my company. And I had some absolute epic disasters driving that thing, like 0 degrees, the windows open, can't have the heat on, and running out of charge in Colorado in the winter. And so I was like, this is not the most desirable product. But the article I read was a guy who drove an EV that wasn't a Tesla across the country, and he said that the network for charging is robust. And EVs are taking off because they're amazing vehicles, and now that range anxiety is going down. In Colorado, we passed legislation that said you have to sell 12% of your EVs at the dealership, that 12% of cars have to be EVs by 2026. By 2026, by 2024, it was like 20%. I mean, it just blew it away. So EVs, clean energy. We haven't built a coal plant in the US since 2013 because solar's cheaper, wind is cheaper. So there's all this hope just on the ground. And then to your point about you're sort of asking, how do you keep going fighting an impossible battle against terrible odds that you're losing? And I would say, let's just look at, John Steinbeck said that Americans have one story, or people have one story, and they just tell it over and over again. What's our story? What's the human story? Well, I submit that it's a tale of a fight against persistent evil that you ultimately lose. That's our story. Well, let's test that against some texts. One example of that is the Bible. That's a story about fighting evil that you never defeat. The Lord of the Rings, which is partly J.R.R. Tolkien argued that those guys at the end, when they go back to the Shire and it's destroyed, they have not defeated evil. Beowulf, where the great hero, the first superhero, at the end dies and leaves his people unprotected. And then Harry Potter. So the point is, these are inspiring stories. And they're inspiring because this is the human struggle. And people today have been given this golden opportunity to do something you never had a shot at before, which is you can be a part of saving civilization. You can be a part of keeping 1 billion people from suffering horribly. You can be part of creating a utopia. You guys know this better than anyone. If we had 100% clean energy and efficient systems like you both are working on, you would have less pollution, jobs that were meaningful. You'd be able to address other issues like housing and mass transit with clean electricity. You'd be able to address heating, building heat and cooling. So this is an amazing time to be alive. The fight's hard, but so is anything important. I'll leave you with this Cormac McCarthy quote from The Road, which is one of my favorite books, and it's very depressing. But in it he says, all things of grace and beauty, such that one holds them to one's heart, have a common provenance in pain. Anything meaningful is difficult. And is that a problem? I don't think so. I think we're up for the fight.
Good answer.
It's good stuff. Yeah, let's end on that, Auden. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for the book. Thanks for everything you do. Let's give you a chance to plug. Where do people find you? Where do they find the book?
Yeah, well, my book is on sale now on Amazon. You can buy it there for very affordably. You can get it at your local bookstore. It's on Audible. And here's my plug. If someone said to me, "Oh, I've got a new climate book, you got to read it," I'd say, "No, please. I don't want to read another climate book." This book is about parenting, about joy, about beauty. It's stories from the real world. It's about children. It's fun from the first sentence. And if you don't think so, I'll send you your money back.
Cool stuff. Well, I think you're now the second author, right, Owen? At least the second.
Yeah.
And we said to the last author when she was on, we're going to start the Let's Talk More Action book club. So
good. Well, that'd be awesome. Thank you guys for what you're doing and for having me on the show. I'm grateful.
You got it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Auden. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Owen. You can find Owen and I on LinkedIn, usually actively antagonizing the more talk, more complaining sustainability crowd. You can find this podcast and more great content at letstalkmoreaction.com. If you like the show, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to take action to make the world a better place?